the number of academic institutions of extremely high caliber, of great excellence, is a lot larger than what any of these rankings would tend to suggest.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jed Macosko at Wake Forest University and Academic Influence, and today we have Professor Anjani Jain, who is in the business school at Yale University. And so we wanted to talk to you a little bit about how you have come across different rankings of business schools and what you found out about them, because I read about this in the news and I wanted to find out a little more from you.
Great. Good to meet you in this video format, Jed. I read a little bit of your blog and it seems very interesting, and I'm honored to be invited to this conversation. I should mention that I have long felt that the whole rankings enterprise is fraught with the possibility of distortions. Now I understand that people like linear orders 1, 2, 3, 4. And so it's perhaps inevitable that these rankings will continue to exist. But just on the surface of it, to take the multi-dimensional complexity of a university experience, let's say from the student's perspective, and reduce it to a linear order, I think is an exercise in great oversimplification. And then to take, let's suppose one could even collapse all these multidimensional elements into one cardinal measure of excellence. Then to further reduce it to an ordinal rank is to ignore the fact that there are so many great universities in the country, let alone the rest of the world. And so it transmits a greatly oversimplified signal to readers of these rankings, and I have long worried about that. But I should acknowledge that these linear orders will continue to exist because people like to think in those terms.
So you've seen a problem for a long time. You know that they're going to still exist. Of course, I really want to ask you, well, how can we make it as good as possible? But first, I just want to hear the backstory on the particular ranking you discovered, and tell us more about that.
Yes, so this was the Bloomberg Businessweek ranking of business schools, which I should note, Jed, was the very first ranking of business schools to become public in the media. And this goes back, I think, to 1988. And it was celebrated by its authors as a voice of the customer. So what they did was to constitute the rank order based on surveys of two groups of stakeholders. One was the current students going through MBA programs. The second were the employers of these graduates. And there was a certain logic to it. And they purported to weigh the two factors, the student survey and the employer survey, in equal measure, 50-50, to compute the overall rank. Over time, this ranking changed its methodology several times. So fast forward to the current ranking, which came out about a couple of months ago now, or about a month and a half ago. They have 5 factors that comprise the computation. And one interesting feature of this ranking is that instead of coming up with their own weights to assign to these 5 factors, they crowdsource the weights. In other words, they ask their stakeholders, the students, the alumni, the employers, etc., what the rates ought to be. And through some process of averaging, they come up with these crowdsourced weights for the 5 factors, which I thought was certainly better than a group of people in the magazine coming up with their weights. Now, a slight digression. One computation I have done with these rankings for my own curiosity is the following. It turns out that if you look at the entire list of schools they rank, in this case 84 of them, the pattern of variances on these 5 factors actually changes quite a bit. So to make it concrete, if you compute the standard deviation on these scores for the top 20 schools, the next 20 schools, the next 20 schools, you will get different variances. Now, what that does is that the effective ranking of, say, the top 20 schools is determined by effective weights that are different from the weights they apply to the whole list. So it's sort of an interesting statistical conundrum, and this is where my background in operations research perhaps comes in handy. I can compute for any subset, let's say the top 20 schools in their published ranking, I can compute the effective weights that determine that order if I have access to the scores that they publish on these 5 factors. So what Bloomberg Businessweek does is to publish the data in what they call the normalized form. So on each of these factors, they normalize the scale from 0 to 100, just a linear stretching or compression of the raw data. And based on those scores, one can actually determine the effective weights. So as I was doing this exercise for the top 20, it wasn't quite adding up. I did it for the top 50, it still wasn't adding up. And so then I included the entire list of 84 schools to determine what the effective weights had to have been to replicate the ranking. And it turned out that those weights were dramatically different from the weights they claimed to have used through this crowdsourcing process. So that got me puzzled. And I wrote to the editors to ask, what am I missing? And what I got back was, I thought, a very unresponsive answer. And that led to my digging deeper. And it boiled down to the following. I'm sorry to be long-winded. It boiled down to the following, that there's a simple yes-no question. And depending on the answer to that yes-no question, 2 possibilities exist. So one possibility is they did not normalize the raw data before they applied their crowdsourced weights. Well, if that's what happened, then of course the weights that I computed, which are greatly different from the crowdsourced weights, those weights determine the order. In other words, by the failure to normalize the data before they applied the weights, they have greatly distorted the weights that they tout as crowdsourced weights.
Yeah.
And if that's what happened, they can still fix it. They can still go back, normalize the data, and publish an amended set of rankings, which I actually gave them. Here is what the resulting rankings would be if you use your own normalized data. And that's a computation anyone can do, because the normalized data is published. All you do is apply their vector of crowdsourced weights, and you have a composite score based on which you rank. So that's one possibility. The second possibility is more troubling. So that's if they did normalize the data before applying the weights. In that case, the discrepancy between the order of schools, the ranking they published, and what you would get by applying their weights to their normalized data, which is public, that discrepancy is unexplainable. And it can be attributed to some mysterious post-calculation perturbation in order to get the list the rank they publish. And I noted that if you compute the ranking the way one would to remain true to the crowdsourced weights by using normalized data, then the order that results is a little topsy-turvy compared to what people might assume the order to be. For instance, the Wharton School ends up being ranked 28, MIT ends up being ranked 21, UT Dallas goes up to rank 9, Emory goes up to rank 10. And I can't know what actually happened because they refused to answer this simple yes-no question. The question was, did you normalize the raw data before you applied the weights to it? And their answer was, this is a deliberately private part of their methodology to thwart people like you from reverse engineering the ranking and gaining an unfair advantage. And
Okay. Well,
so,
they have spoken. So it doesn't look like they're going to give you anything more.
No,
You're not. Okay.
yeah, so I think they have now closed ranks behind the stands, and they have told me that they are not going to answer any further questions.
Okay.
They also did not respond to some of the journalists who reached out.
Yeah, I saw that. So, well, I mean, it's their ranking, but I think that you've raised a good point that it's not as simple as they want to portray it. It's not just crowdsourced weightings on top of published 5 categories. It's not
Right.
that. That's not what it is, and they should not advertise it as that, because that's not what it is.
Right.
So whatever it is, they can do whatever they want with it,
Yeah.
but they should not advertise. And
Yeah.
I mean, at some level, this is selling their brand.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they are using false advertisement to sell their brand, which
Yeah.
is probably
Yeah.
not fair
Well,
and good, but nothing will happen, right? In your opinion, there's going to be no fallout from this. It's just you
that's
and a few journalists.
it's hard for me to tell, Jed, because I think a number of deans are troubled. The deans of business schools are troubled by this. And, it's an annual ranking, so it won't be too much time before they come back and request reams of data, as they always do, from schools and go through these survey exercises. One other thing to add to what I said previously is that I also went back to 2 of their previous rankings. They did not publish a ranking due to the pandemic in 2020, but I looked at the 2019 and 2018 rankings, and I found exactly the same discrepancies between what they published and what you would get based on applying their methodology to their data. But here's perhaps something interesting. The extent to which the so-called top tier of this ranking gets churned by applying their weights to their data has grown over time. In other words, the perturbations you would see in the, let's say, top 20 or 30 have become much larger as you get to 2021. And it reminded me of the Chinese saying that when you ride a tiger, it becomes very difficult to dismount.
Very true. Well, that's very good. I actually like to end on that, except for that I still want you to say, what would you do if you were in charge of all rankings everywhere in order to make it so that people can still have the rankings they want, but that it will do the least amount of damage?
Yeah.
Even if they're correct, like let's say, Businessweek Bloomberg fixes this problem and everybody has clear, transparent rankings. Is there anything else that needs to be done besides that?
So the answer, at least a partial answer, Jed, to your question, the best answer I have seen to your question was actually given by a colleague of mine right here at Yale, Professor Andrew Metrick, who's a professor of finance, and he, with a couple of co-authors, published a paper quite some time ago looking at undergraduate college rankings. And they made the following observations, that when students who have multiple choices for college make that choice. Economists call it revealed preference. These revealed preference, if they have the choice between A, B, and C, which school they go to. This revealed choice, revealed preference, carries a lot of information, but because one could argue that all of the past reputation of these schools, A, B, and C, plus all of the future prospects of graduating from A, B, or C, are collapsed into this choice, voting with their feet. So what they did was to look at, they were able to get data on revealed preferences of students who had these multiple choices and construct a ranking based on these choices. And that methodology to me seems to be the most appropriate. If you're going to reduce this multidimensional complexity to a linear order, I think that's perhaps the way I would recommend. It surprises me that no media organization has picked up on this idea. The added point I'll hasten to interject here is the following perception that I have, that just in the US alone, the number of academic institutions of extremely high caliber, of great excellence, is a lot larger than what any of these rankings would tend to suggest. And what I worry about is that these rankings sort of converge or direct people's attention to this pecking order. And they tend to, I think, do this in a way that is very distorting. I did my graduate work at a public institution, UCLA, and I know from my own personal experience what an extraordinary group of faculty and scholars I had the good fortune to interact with, and that fact gets obscured. I could say this about a large number of institutions, public and private, that may not figure in the top 20, 30 of any of these rankings, but they divert our attention, these rankings divert our attention, and eventually I think it affects the ability of these institutions to attract faculty, to attract resources, funding, etc. Donors get influenced by these rankings, not just prospective students. Employers get influenced by them. So on the whole, I continue to harbor misgivings about the exercise of reducing all this to a linear order.
Well, thank you so much. It has been truly wonderful to get to know you, Professor Jain, and your perspective, and I look forward to interacting with you more in the future.
Thank you for giving me the chance, Jed.